My daughter's a writer, and she's purple hair. So I just had to tell Heather this morning with her blue hair. So.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you all. Really great to see everybody. I'm going to start with a story, of course. When Elizabeth Holmes was 19 years old, she sat down in her professor's office and she said to him, "I want to drop out of school." Needless to say, the professor did not think that this was Miss Holmes' most brilliant idea ever. So he asked her, "Why? Why do you want to drop out?" The answer she gave surprised him, and believe it or not, it convinced him that for her, it was the right choice. Fast forward 11 years to 2014, and Elizabeth Holmes was listed by Forbes as one of America's youngest billionaires, self-made net worth of $4.5 billion. So I ask you, what answer could a 19-year-old give to the question, why do you want to drop out, that would convince a Stanford University professor of chemical engineering that this was the right choice, and furthermore propel her to the head of a $9 billion company of her own making, and a net worth of $4.5 billion? It's an important question because it turns out that the answer to that question is also the answer to the question, how do we, as marketers, drop out of the rat race that content marketing has become? And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Every week we're asked to do more. We're asked to write more blog entries, more white papers, more case studies, more press releases, do more videos, more webinars, more infographics. It doesn't ever seem to end, and as if that weren't enough, we're asked to be on more social media platforms. Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn are no longer sufficient. We've got to be on Instagram and Pinterest and Vine and 1,000 other platforms that haven't even been invented yet, because we all have that much time on our hands. It wasn't always like this. When I got my start in the early 2000s, content marketing was a wide open blue ocean. It was just waiting for us to dive in there. And if I wanted to become a recognized thought leader on a topic like data infrastructure, which I did on behalf of a client, all I had to do was start a blog and start posting interesting, intelligent, relevant material in what we now call our buyer personas. We didn't use that word then, but they would flock to the blog and converse with us. Why? Because there weren't that many places for them to have these conversations. They were so excited to see this great content. Boom, they came. Now, when was the last time you launched a brand new blog on behalf of a brand and immediately had people commenting on your first post that weren't personal friends of yours? Right. This doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen to me anymore either, so you're not alone.
Thanks, Mom.
So that's the bad news. And it gets worse, because the big companies, and I'm talking about the Googles and the IBMs and the Apples, these companies are buying entire publishing houses in order to flood the content marketing sea with their content. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have it in my budget to buy a publishing house. So the sea is no longer blue. The sea is now red. It's red with the blood of competition. And that is the bad news. The good news, actually, hold on, I have a little bit more bad news before we get to the good news. The bad news is that 73% of marketers, this is from a Forrester research study, 2014 study, 73% of marketers created more content in the previous 12 months, in that 12-month period than they had in the previous 12 months. And only 42% of them consider those efforts to be effective. I don't like those odds. So, now for the good news. The good news is that you, and you, and you, and everybody in this room has inside of you everything you need to create your own blue ocean and drop out of the here for today. In a minute, I'm going to tell you Elizabeth Holmes' secret. I'm going to tell you what she said to that professor that is also the secret to how she became what she is. And then we're going to break that down into what that means for us as marketers, how we can leverage that. And then we're going to talk about some very specific strategic and tactical exercises that you can begin today that will help you create your blue ocean for yourself and for your companies that you work for. So let's go back to 19-year-old Elizabeth Holmes in that professor's office. And he just asked her why she wants to drop out. And her answer, so I'm going to paraphrase that for you. When asked why she wanted to drop out and do something different, Elizabeth Holmes said, I don't want to make an incremental change with my life. I want to create something entirely new, something that will help people, something that will help people. I don't want to make something big and new. I don't want to make money. She was never in it for the money. Everybody who ever talked to her agrees that she was never in this for the money, even though she managed to find her way there. She was in it because she wanted to help people. Now I can hear the voices, and I don't think they're coming from inside this room, but I hear them, and they're saying, but I'm in business to business. I'm not in the business of helping people. I'm in the business of helping businesses. And that is the #1 mistake that business marketers make, B2B business marketers make, is thinking that they need to talk to businesses, because you don't. Inside of the businesses that you're marketing to are people who are making decisions. And this actually goes back to something that Jen was saying earlier about the buyer personas, and we'll get into that in more detail. But at every level of the organization, there are stakeholders that have an influence on what decisions are made. And each of those stakeholders have their own opinions about things, their own feelings about things, their own ideas about things. They have pains and they have fears and they have hopes. And these are things that if you can figure out those things, then you can figure out how to help them. So let me see what my next slide is, because I get really excited and then I forget where I am. Right, okay. When you start with what's at stake for the buyer, you earn the right to their attention. This goes back to helping. How do you help? You find out what's at stake for the buyer. Find out what's at stake for them, and you earn the right to their attention. And the first step, actually this is before the first step, the first thing you have to do, the first thing you have to is let go of something. And what you have to let go of is this idea that your job is to sell. Your idea is not to sell. It's not to sell on behalf of your company. It's not to sell yourself. Your job is to help the buyer in such a fashion that they cannot imagine doing anything else but buying from you. Your job is to help the buyer in such a fashion that they cannot imagine doing anything other than buying from you. Okay, so let's break that down further. And this goes back, Jen was talking about buyer personas. This is our first step, right? If you're going to help somebody, you have to understand them. Helping is not about going in and giving somebody what you think they need. Genuine helping is about going in and giving them what they genuinely need. So in marketing terms, we start with a buyer persona document, okay? You already have inside of your organization probably most of the resources you need to get this started. You also, depending on the level of your resources, you can do market research of various sorts. You can just start asking customers questions. But what's critical is that for every, sorry, I'm standing in front of it, for every essential buyer in your buying process, you need to have an understanding of them. Now, also as said earlier, this is not something you have to do all at once. At first, you can start with 1, 2, maybe 3 that you identify as the most critical buyers or buying influencers in the buying process, and start with them. And if you can even hit those few, you will already be light years ahead of most of the other people who are marketing in your industry. So, what are the things that you want to know about the buyer persona? Obviously, you want basic demographic information. You want to know what is their role in the buying process. Are they actually are they the one that signs the purchase order, or are they the one that does the initial research, or are they somewhere in between? What's their role? The other thing you want to know, and these are probably the most important thing you can know. What are they afraid of? So, what happens if they don't make the right decision? What happens if they don't make a decision at all? What's going to happen to them next year or the year after? What are they afraid of? What hurts? And actually, usually this is the other way up. I don't know why it says fears and then pains there. Usually you start with what hurts, the here and now. What's the pain? Okay, so what are they experiencing right now that's causing them to go, oh, I need help? Okay, but then there are other kinds of pains too. Maybe it's they get calls on Thanksgiving morning and they're sick of that, right? There's all kinds of things that can be pains for them. And then the third thing, which is actually not up here, is hope. And this is the fun part, right? Everybody has hopes. There's professional hopes. There's hopes for the company. So you can start with, they hope to increase the bottom line. They want to reduce their ad spend. They want to increase the lifetime customer value. Those sort of basic hopes, right? And then there's also career hopes. So maybe they're hoping to move up to the next level. If you're talking to a VP, maybe they want to be in the C-suite someday. Or they want to move to the senior VP role. There's also personal, emotional hopes. So I hope I'll look good to my peers. I hope I'll look good to my spouse. I hope I'll be able to buy a boat next summer from the bonus I get from this project. So these are things, if you understand those emotional motivators for your buyers, you can start talking to them in ways that actually matter to them. You can start earning the right to be in their inbox. And what that does for you is it also tells you what you don't have to be talking about. And so it frees you up to not talk about the things that don't matter to them. Now, for every buyer persona, we also have a buyer's journey. And this is the step 2. So where the buyer is in the buyer's journey impacts what kinds of content they want to consume, because they're asking different kinds of questions. So I think of it as really 4 stages, but most people focus on 3, and I'll explain why in a moment. But the three main stages that we talk about are awareness, consideration, and decision. And actually, you can read it a little better here. In the awareness stage, they realize they have a problem. They're not sure how common this problem is. They're not sure how important this problem is. It's come to their attention at a level that they know they want to do something about it, but they're not really sure what. So at this point, they're looking for very specific types of things. And by the way, I am going to give you a link to a resource where you can download this and a lot of really great materials for planning the buyer process. So you don't have to necessarily take notes unless you just really enjoy taking notes. But there's certain key terms that associate with that, certain types of content, certain types of questions that you answer at that level. Same thing for consideration. At the consideration level, they not only know they have a problem, they have some sense of what solutions are available, what ones might be a good match for them, who some of the big players are, who some of they may have a short or a long list of potential vendors for that solution. And now they're sort of evaluating which solution are they going to go with, which provider are they going to go with. And then finally they move into the decision stage, and this is where they're ready to sign something. They've definitely had at least a short list, and now they want to know who can actually genuinely deliver on this. What's their reputation? How are they solving this problem for other companies? This is really the only stage of the buyer's journey where the buyer actually cares about you. That's the hard truth of it. Up to this point, they only care about themselves. At this point, they start caring about you, so this is when you can start talking about you. Right? I mean, everything should be branded. I'm not saying don't put your brand on the materials, but you don't really want to be talking about you or your company until they're ready to make a decision. And that's when you start saying, okay, here is why we can solve your specific problems. So that's the buying process. And at this point, some of you are maybe thinking, okay, that's nice, that's great information, but it's just more stuff to do. And I thought you were going to tell us how to make this easier. And so I am. This part of the process, it's kind of like what Jen said about the easy button. It's not an easy button, but when you go through this process, you're going to find that you can now be one of those 42% of marketers who are actually having an impact because you've earned the right to the attention of your buyer. And you're also going to know what you don't need to be producing, what you don't need to be saying, where you don't need to be spending time. You're going to know, when you do the buyer persona document, you're going to know which platforms you don't have to be on because your buyer's not there. They're not hanging out there, you don't need to be hanging out there. Okay, so this is the first step. The first step is cutting out everything you don't need and focusing in on the things that are genuinely going to earn you that relationship with those prospects. Okay, that having been said, there is still a lot of content that you are expected to produce. So I do have some sort of tried and true approaches for getting through the content. Once you know which content you are going to produce, we do have some very little speed hacks for you. And there are 3 key things that you want to do. Sorry, actually we just talked about this one already. Okay, you're going to stop creating content they don't want to consume, you're going to stop hanging out where they aren't hanging out, and you're going to invest in speed hacks. Okay, here's your speed hacks. You're going to build content pillars, you're going to curate amazing content, and you're going to strategically outsource. So what does this mean? Content pillars are going to map back to your buyer's buying process. Eventually, not right away, eventually your goal is to have at least one content pillar for each stage of that buyer's journey for each of your buyer personas. A content pillar is a deep, remarkable, incredible, wonderful, amazing piece of content that your buyers genuinely really want to consume that is a significant chunk of content. So this can be some kind of a downloadable kit. For instance, the resource I'm going to give you, that buyer's journey resource kit, is actually from HubSpot, which Jen mentioned earlier. It's just a free piece of a resource, and when you sign up for it, they are going to take your email address and you can unsubscribe from it, but that's part of their marketing. They are practicing this method. They offer that free resource for that reason. So a kit like that, it can be a webinar, a really good meaty webinar. It can be a video tutorial sequence. It can be any kind of really deep content. Now what's going to happen is you have this content pillar. It's related to a specific part of the buyer's process, and you're then going to use it to propagate multiple other content assets. From that one content pillar, you can build blog entries. So for every ebook that I write, I also draft between 8 and 12 blog entries that are basically just pulled out of that ebook, plopped into a blog entry, adjusted a little bit, given a nice catchy headline, link back to the ebook, boom. Okay, so that's one form of content. You can create little tiny videos. If that's something that you're doing, you can create infographics from it. You can, landing pages, entire email campaigns can be based around the content in that. So it's really important that those content pillars contain that really deep, meaty information, and that's why it's so important to map the buyer's journey first, so you know that when you invest in that piece of content, it's going to be something that they genuinely want. And some companies, and I have not personally done this myself, some companies build up to 150 content assets from one content pillar. So think about that. That's a lot of content. So that's your first strategy. Second one, curate amazing content. So one of the things that, and it depends a little bit on your industry, but one of the things that buyers are frequently looking for is they want to know that you're up to date on the latest goings on. And they also are looking for particular types of information. They want to know what's the latest going on once they start thinking about purchasing a product. So the way that you curate amazing content is, again, go back to your buyer. What are their questions, right? And you start subscribing to the kinds of publications that answer the kinds of questions that your buyers are asking. So what are your buyers subscribing to? Those are the publications you should be subscribing to. What blogs are your buyers reading? You should be reading those blogs. And then what you do, and there's a couple of ways of doing this. When I talk about curate, I am not talking about syndication. In fact, I will tell you, please don't syndicate somebody else's content. The occasions when that is beneficial are extremely rare. If it is somewhere else on the web, you don't need to be republishing it on your page. It's not going to help your SEO. It's going to look bad to your readers if they happen to know about the other content, or when it shows up in Google and there's 3 sites that have the same content. You don't want to do that, so that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is creating a resource that that becomes a go-to for your buyers to find out the information they want. And there's a number of ways you can do this. For Scopcity, I do it on Twitter. So in any given week, and it varies by week, but generally I'm publishing between 15 and 100 links to content that I have personally curated, which means I've read it. I feel that it is valuable to our market. I feel that people are going to be truly engaged by this content, and they can click through. Now, a little hack on that end. I am not actually reading 100 pieces of content per week. For every piece of content that I find that is highly valuable, Twitter can tolerate having that tweeted about 10 times. So I'm scheduling it on Hootsuite. When I find a really great piece of content, I'll schedule it maybe 3 times this week, once next week, once 2 weeks out from there. I've got things scheduled out in April of next year because they're relevant and evergreen enough that I can do that. So that's one way to curate. Another way to curate is if you want to be blogging regularly. Let's say you've been tasked with blogging twice a day, which sounds insane to me. I certainly don't have the resources to be blogging twice a day, but you may, and it's not as resource intensive as you might think if you're taking this approach. And so the curation approach on that end is, if you know what pieces of content are going to be interesting to your buyers, you can type 1 or 2 paragraphs that kind of give your company's take on this piece of industry news or this piece of interesting content, then put in a preview of the piece of content that you're curating and a link to that content. And you can do that twice a day for a lot less than it would take to write the traditional article, full-blown 500 to 600 word, or now they're telling us it has to be 1,000 words or nobody's reading it, right? So you don't have to do that. If you're doing it that frequently, you really have to have these kind of hacks to do that. So curating in that way is a valuable source. And you guys are probably pretty creative. You may be able to think of other ways to curate without syndicating that can be valuable to your buyers. And then finally, of course, there's strategic outsourcing, and we're seeing this more and more, I think, in the span of my career. It's gone from, this is something that small organizations do occasionally, to something that almost everybody does. And of course, the important thing about outsourcing is knowing that not all outsourcing is created equal, and being sure that you partner with somebody. Oh, so sorry. No worries. Is making sure that you're partnering with an organization who gets you, but what's more important than them getting you? They get your buyer. That's right. They get your buyers. Okay, so that's the number one thing you're looking for. If you're going to outsource, especially if you're outsourcing content, you're getting somebody else to write for you or create videos for you, make sure they understand your buyer. And if you've got B2B buyers, that may be harder than you think. Just because somebody can write or create a video does not necessarily mean they understand the B2B marketing landscape, that they understand what CFOs need and what vice presidents need and what software users need. So that's the number one thing to look for. And I have resources actually on all of this to help give you guys kind of a heads up. So we'll come back to that, and we're also there. Is it right there? And we are going to also talk about. We're going to actually do a little bit of workshopping here in a minute. So once that is done, the rest of this puzzle is, and this goes back to actually the marketing automation again, is measure. Follow whether you're using Google Analytics and Hootsuite and whatever, or if you're using one of these major marketing automation platforms, make sure you're measuring what's getting responses and create more of that and less of what's not. And I consider this a speed hack because, again, it's about what you're not doing as much as it is about what you are doing. If it's not working for you, don't do it. If it is working for you, do more of it. And it creates a feedback loop. So that's the adjust and then lather, rinse, repeat. So you don't have to dye your hair blue to create a blue ocean. But all of you can create a blue ocean. And it's not free, but it's yours, and it can be amazing. So before we do the workshop portion, does anybody have questions for me so far? I'm going to take a drink while you're thinking of your questions. Yeah?
In general, what types of content have you found work best for lead generation?
That's a good question, and it varies. I mean, again, it has to do with those buyers, right? Mm-hmm. But what we're finding out is that it's actually a little bit surprising. For one thing, there's always this kind of tension between video and text, and it turns out you really kind of need both. I may be getting my numbers slightly off, but something like 65% of B2B executive buyer decision makers view a video on at least a weekly basis while making a business-related decision. So video is important. We know that. It is also true that something like 47% of executives hate video. So text is also important, unless you don't care about 47% of your buyers. So, again, it depends. We do a lot. We find that in an inbound marketing scenario, ebooks tend to be really valuable content pillars because they'll download them and read them and pass them around. Also, case studies. Case studies are seriously powerful material. You can use them at all points of the buyer's journey. They do so many jobs all in one piece. They tell the story of what it is that you actually do in a way that the reader can really dig in and understand what it is you do. They provide provide social proof, which we know is so incredibly powerful because, oh look, this respected organization works with them and look at what they've accomplished. They tend to be a piece that the sales team can use to support their sales process, even while the marketing team is using it to support their marketing efforts. And they can be broken down. So going back to the content pillars idea, case studies make great content pillars if they're good and in depth, or maybe a series of case studies, because you can take pieces of them and blog about them. Or Peggy Brookhouse, and I'm sorry I don't remember. Ted Todd, thank you. What did they do? They got up here and they told you a case study. It was amazing, right? It was fascinating. Our brains are wired to love stories. This is deeply primal. This goes back to prehistoric times, from long before we had written word, or certainly anything approximating marketing. People sat around the fireplace and they told stories. So when you can tell a story that's relevant to your market, you've got them. You've got their attention. So case studies are huge. Case studies, ebooks, and videos, I would say, right now, in most of the industries that I'm working in, those are kind of the big three that we're doing and finding a lot of good results from. Now, we haven't been doing, my company does not do webinars and infographics, so I don't have personal experience with those. We do know that they get a lot of engagement. Just statistically speaking, they can generate a lot of engagement. So, any other questions? Okay. So what we're going to do, some of you may already have sort of defined your personas for your organization. So if you already have really clearly defined personas, do go ahead. This is a worksheet to start thinking down those lines, and also to start defining. Even if you have them, go ahead and glance through it, because there may be things that you haven't already thought about. You can kind of fill in. And then when you're done with that, I also have a resource list, and I can probably email this to you so you can just click on the links. But it's got the links in here. The next piece that you want to look at is mapping that buyer's journey. Go ahead and download that resource kit. It's amazing. I promise you it is worth your email address. I don't generally, I wouldn't normally give somebody, say, a link to something if I didn't really believe that it was worth giving up your email address for it. And they won't spam you. They do have good unsubscribe policies, and you'll be able to unsubscribe easily if you want to. And then below that, there's some more resources we have on our website. There's an ebook writer's kit, so if you do decide you want to write ebooks, it's got a template, it's got samples, it's got interview questions to ask your subject matter expert, it's got a process for pulling it all together. And then we also have a guide to hiring a copywriter, so if you decide to outsource to a copywriter, what to be looking for, what questions to be asking, and so on. And so I'm going to pass these out, and then I'm going to be here, and if you have questions as you're going through them, I'm here to talk to you.